Monkey's good. Monkey's good. Should I stand up?
Hello everyone, my name is Rachael. So I'm one of the admins of the Wellington Feminist Collective, and I also am a former sex worker and a survivor of sexual violence. And I attended the first ever Slutwalk, but was not part of organising it. And I attended the second one, I think, too. And I wanted to talk a bit today mostly about words and reclamation and identity. And I think Polly's going to talk a bit about sort of cultural inclusiveness of Slutwalk and also talk a bit about her experiences as one of the organisers. So, yeah, I guess I wanted to start off by talking about the word slut and what it means in wider usage. And in my mind, slut is very much quite a sexist and gendered term. It's definitely used often, I think, to describe women who are sexually assertive or promiscuous, or occasionally even women who are flirtatious and reveal nothing else about their sexual life. I think something for me is that I experienced it a lot after, as a negative label, after I was sexually assaulted. So for me, I've got this really intense personal relationship with the word where it took me a long time to get to the stage where I could reclaim it. And for a long time, it was just a word that I never wanted to hear. But I think in my mind now, the word slut really goes to the heart of this sort of bad girl, good girl dichotomy. And growing up, I was raised in a very Christian household in a very small town, and I definitely felt a lot of pressure to be a good girl. As I got into my teens, I felt a lot of that pressure applied in terms of sexuality and sexual identity. And I think that that it's something that's written about widely in terms of the socialisation of women and girls, but I think it's also something that you can apply to the relationship between feminism and sexuality, particularly the quite strained history of feminism with sex workers. And I think there's a historical strained relationship where I feel feminism is moving closer and closer towards being, in general, an ally to sex workers, but I think we've still got a long way to go. And being someone who identifies as a staunch feminist and also who was very outspoken and proud about my experiences as a sex worker, that's something that really is close to home. I think the word slut has a huge amount of potential for reclamation, and I think in that way you can compare it to the word queer, which used to be a hugely derogatory thing to be called, and I know a lot of older gay, lesbian or bisexual people who don't use the word because they've got really strong, hurtful associations with it. But I think you can see these days more and more people calling themselves queer and turning it from something that used to be a put down or something hurtful and something that was very symbolic of systematic oppression. They're turning that into something to celebrate and really kind of flipping around the morality of the word. And I think, in my mind, that's what Slutwalk has aimed to do, not to argue that everyone should identify as a slut, but I think it realises that the word slut could be applied to all of us if someone wanted to police our sexuality. And so for those who can feel comfortable saying that they're a slut and proud, it can be quite powerful. I think thinking about the feminism and slut kind of relationship, there's been a really good example recently. A bunch of Auckland law students did a parody video of the song Blurred Lines, and we actually posted it at the Feminist Collective thinking it was great to have a gender-bending take on the video. And after some discussion broke out, we realised that we hadn't listened to the lyrics very carefully, and they've got lines in there about how they're powerful women and you can't treat them like a whore, and they don't want to do sexual acts with you. And I think every member of the admin, especially of the Feminist Collective, thinks that that's a bit of a false argument, that there's no connection between your self-respect and what you want to do or not do sexually. I think that was a message in my Slutwalk experiences that were really strong too. There were lots of people there who held signs saying, no means no, and that was a really strong part of the message for them, that you can identify as a slut and be proud, and central to that pride is the fact that you can say yes to lots of sex and still say no to individual acts, that your consent should still be respected. And I think for me that's probably the most harmful association I've experienced with the word slut, is people thinking that if you are a slut you don't have self-respect, or if they call you a slut they can respect you less. I also think Slutwalk plays a really important part in the power of shocking as part of your activism. Both times that I went, I wore just some cute little undies and a singlet and held a sign that said "suck my left one," which is probably my favourite Bikini Kill quote. And I mean, I've always been quite happy to shock people in lots of ways, but I think in activism, when you're doing something that previously might have really scared you, and certainly I haven't always felt comfortable with the idea of walking in public with no pants on, but I think there was a real personal power for me in the thought that I could shock someone by holding a quite sexually aggressive sign and wearing no clothes, and the point of the march was about my autonomy and my consent. So that for me was really personally empowering. But I also think that, as kind of is evidenced by the debate here today, that power of shocking or being a bit controversial has a lot of potential to change things within movements and within groups of activists or groups of workers around issues like sexual violence, because it may be seen at first as divisive, but I think the fact that it does encourage debates and discussions, and particularly ones like I'm imagining being today, I think all of us are probably going to have a lot of common ground and actually maybe end up agreeing more than disagreeing, but the fact that these debates can take place respectfully and respecting lived experience, I think is really important. So I see that as a huge amount of potential in the Slutwalk movement too, just keeping discussions going in feminist circles. The last thing that I really, really love about Slutwalk is that it kind of, in my mind, speaks to this word that has so often been used to divide women from each other. And I think that quite often women are quick to label other women sluts. And I think that is used as, it creates this difference or creates a division between women. And I think Slutwalk really celebrates that some people are sluts and some people aren't. And there's no morality, there's no moral division between that. And I think that a really big part of feminism moving forward is, particularly something we've found with our organisation, is that you need to be so aware of intersectionality. It needs to be something we're working on all the time. And it's not enough for us as an organisation to say we're for all people who think they're feminists. We need to work to be changing culture and to finding ways to unite while still respecting difference. So I think that social constructions such as the word slut are a real distraction from that idea of unity and working together. So that's my argument in support of Slutwalk, really. I'll hand over to the other team now. Thank you.
I'd like to begin my speech with a short disclaimer. Until recently, I had read very little about the Slutwalk other than what I'd seen in the news. And I had not been on a Slutwalk, and nor am I inclined to do so in the future. So preparing for this debate was an adventure into some new territory for me. I'm not a theoretical feminist. I just go by the seat of the pants. But surprisingly, it has helped me to clarify some of my fairly muddled views about the issues underpinning this debate. I'd like to, at this point, acknowledge the source of a lot of the thinking that I've done, which is a blog or a series of 5 blogs done by a student at the William and Mary College in Williamsburg, Virginia. Sarah Overton has been doing a research paper titled "The Pornification of Protest, the Slutwalk, US Feminism and Contemporary Sexual Politics." And I found it incredibly helpful, given I was going into this whole new area, to have these 5 blog posts that were just really informative. Now, Sandra sold this debate to me as an opportunity to discuss what has been a hot topic in the feminist blogosphere, that it could be fun, and that there were no winners and losers in the debate. Well, that took me to all sorts of places. Firstly, no winners and losers. Well, let's get real here. It's all about winning, isn't it? And fun? Well, I wanted to bring forth my persona of Clarissa the cougar. And I wanted to launch a more age-appropriate feminist sex-positive protest in the form of the cougar crawl. However, reason has prevailed. And I will take a somewhat more serious look at the issues, because once I got over my initial reaction to the polarisation and the pillaring tone of some of the blogs, it was actually quite interesting. So firstly, because I'm on the opposing team, I obviously will be opposing. So I'm not in disagreement with the core messages of the slut walk, but I believe the ambiguity of the brand is problematic. So from what I've read, the slut walk is a fairly straightforward activist response to some ill-informed comments. And as an immediate action or reaction, it seems entirely appropriate as to challenge victim-blaming comments and the culture which supports such views. It is informed by a sex-positive perspective and sets out to reclaim the word slut as a positive expression of women's rights to consensual sex without shame and blame. For me, the problem arises as the initial protest has gathered momentum as a movement for social change. My and other criticisms centre on the key brand or slogan, on the ambiguity and inherent values within that brand that undermine its message. So if we consider the media response, it would appear that the point of the protest was largely missed, and the media was titillated by the possibility of tits and bums being on display, rather than the more serious social change message the organisers were hoping to address. One could argue that the action has failed from the get-go because it was not understood and its core message was not adequately transmitted via the media. Critics have also noticed that the action is a very Western, white, middle, upper class response, and it doesn't easily fit with women's rights movements in other cultural contexts. Specifically, black women in America challenge the slut walk as it does not fit with their historical and cultural context of colonisation, slavery and oppression. In particular, how that is manifested in the concept of slut and sexual availability and sexual exploitation of women of colour in ways which are very different to women within the dominant culture. Another problem with the brand is that it in some ways reinforces rape myths, that dress and dressing like sluts means you're more likely to get raped. In much the same way that the Take Back the Night marches also, on the face of it, seem to support myths of sexual violence happening on the streets, rather than what we know as the reality. I think Slut Walk also doesn't easily address child sexual abuse prevention issues. And though every protest doesn't have to cover everything, I think it's a major issue. Slut is a very loaded word and one which critics argue is beyond redemption. Much debate appears to be deflected around the meaning of the word and whether it is one that feminists wish to redeem. And that undermines some of the key messages of the campaign. Another criticism has been the polarising of fun femmes or feminist light versus the more traditional feminist theory. And I suspect that this tension possibly reflects a generational issue. Not that I'm saying that I'm old and they're young, but the intention of the Slut Walk to reclaim the word slut is challenged as being flawed, as it seems on the surface to mimic the patriarchal ideal of female sexuality instead of rejecting it. As one author, Kathy Miriam, noted in her article titled Feminism, Neoliberalism and the Slut Walk, if the choice of sexual self-presentation for women were such a free and unconstrained choice, why does it seem to come in only one flavour? Namely, some pre-conceptualised variant of the patriarchal construct of slut. She further goes on to suggest that the slut walk and the feminist movement as a whole has seen a departure from prioritising liberation or the transformation of the dominant social order to one of personal empowerment, a departure from the 80s construct of the personal is political. So the message of personal empowerment, as supported by the sex-positive movement, would suggest that people have the power and the right to make individual choices about their sexual behaviour, and argues that all kinds of sexual experiences are okay as long as it's between consenting adults. Does it run out? In contrast, what has been called the sex-negative movement or theory examines the role of patriarchal thinking and power on our sexual behaviour, and views the sex-positive movement as lacking context based on the understanding of patriarchy and how that is played out in current sexualised messages in society today. The wider context of our society is important to acknowledge here. In the Western world in particular, we currently live in a highly sexualised society where the pursuit of personal empowerment and the rights of the individual hold sway. Within this context, women, particularly young women, are required to navigate a complex and contradictory set of very fluid social norms. On the one hand, they are being bombarded with media, movies and fashion, which glorifies sex and sexual availability. Running alongside of this are the cultural norms that shame and blame. And women are required to walk the fine line between being sexually available and being a slut. And regardless of which side of this line she falls on, she is still available to be raped within the context of current social norms. What does this mean for the lived experience of many young women today? I would suggest that the ongoing high levels of sexual violence we see today, in particular date rape and meet tonight rape scenarios, would suggest that sexual freedom of women is a long way from being a universally accepted social norm. Slogans or brands, because they are snappy, slogans or brands work because they are snappy, they catch our attention, and there's no denying that this is the case with the slut walk. But does the slogan adequately represent the very nuanced debate that exists for women making positive sexual choices in the context of the patriarchal social norms that exist today? I think not. Does the promoting of sexual positivity address the wider issues of women's roles in society? And how relevant is this message within the wider cultural context of women's oppression? Is redeeming the word slut key to preventing sexual violence? No. It is part of the picture, but only one small part. And it is a very Western privileged vision that for me has yet to reconcile itself with the patriarchal context within which it sits.
Hello, is it working? Okay. Kumusta? Magandang panahon sa inyong lahat. My name is Polly, and as you would have guessed from my first few lines, I was born in the Philippines and have been very blessed to be raised in New Zealand as a very strict Catholic. I help Rachael and a couple of other women run an online and community-based group called the Wellington Young Feminist Collective. And I pay the bills by providing ministers with policy advice about farms. So before you write me off completely as a person who doesn't know her virgins from her hoes, I was also the coordinator of the 2011 Slutwalk, and that's the basis from which I'm talking today. I'd really like to thank Sandra and the rest of you here for this opportunity to let my voice be heard, and as a young woman of colour, the chance to have this conversation in a space that I feel safe in is a real enormous privilege. So here we go, my 10 minutes of fame aimed at proving to you that Slutwalk is a great idea and that challenging the negative use of the word slut is key to preventing sexual violence. So where to start? Quite a big piece of the pie here. We'll go from the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. 24th of January 2010, we've all heard it, the 12 words that have changed his life and my life forever. Women should avoid dressing like sluts in order not to be victimised. Now, these 12 words, while deeply offensive, have also for me been very transformative. They've kicked off a global wave of protests, online discussion, and other forms of what I consider grassroots activism. So for me, I remember marching. I was wearing a black business dress and brown flats, I think, and I did not have a big banner proclaiming my sluthood. I marched because I wanted to, because I know that language is a weapon, and I know that it's a weapon wielded against the powerless. I marched to enforce that only rapists cause rape and that sexual assault can never be justified. I marched to end the policing of bodies and sexuality, and to reclaim the word slut. So for me, Slutwalk has given people a place to share their stories, and proclaim their desire to lead sexual lives without being judged or persecuted. Using the word slut and turning it into something positive. Organisers like myself in a lot of different countries around the world have used marches and also Facebook and Twitter as a way of raising awareness and gaining support. And this has allowed people who are engaged with the Slutwalk movement to be aware of the solidarity, the networks around them, as well as giving them the chance to provide solidarity to similar organisations. And so for me, and of course I'm going to say this because I helped organise one, what Slutwalk has achieved cannot be disregarded. It's energised a growing and inexplicable discontent amongst young women, and encouragingly enough for a lot of young men my age. It's directed at this rage and this power in a way that academia never could. It's stopped preaching to the choir, and it's taken the argument to the streets. And unlike many protests put on by more mainstream women's organisations, running for breast cancer and so forth, Slutwalks have cropped up organically in city after city after city, and they're fuelled by this raw emotion and this political energy. And for me, that's why Slutwalk has struck me as the future of feminism. And it's not because an entire generation of women are going to organise under this big banner of slut, or because these marches are going to completely eradicate the damaging tendency of law enforcement or the media to blame sexual assault victims, although I think it's put a bit of a dent in that. The success of Slutwalk does herald a new day in feminist organising. When one woman's anger begins online and takes to the streets, when a local step makes global waves, and when one feminist action can spark debate, controversy and activism, that has lasting effects on the feminist movement. And this is why we need Slutwalk. This is why people from across the world have rallied together, united for freedom against sexual violence, and to term it as something that's more than just a woman's issue, but something that is a human right. We stand united in our conviction that people have the right to exercise their sexuality without fear, and that will not be used against them if they're ever assaulted. Well, gosh, that just sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Just zip that case right up. It's a movement that reminds me that words matter, a movement that's chosen a word, quite a harmful word, I'd say, and has allowed me to reclaim that, to embrace that word as part of my own. And for me, that's a really powerful form of feminist activism. The experience has been really amazing. It's absolutely changed my life, and it's humbled me in ways that I don't think millennials should ever be humbled. But, you know, it's like with any activist movement, and hopefully this isn't conceding too much to my opposing team, like any form of activist movement, it has its limitations. And so this is where I talk about being a woman of colour in this movement. I think we've come to this point in feminist movement building where we need to acknowledge that differing histories necessitate differing strategies. And this is why I'm kind of ambivalent about accusing my non-people of colour sisters as being racist or as being non-inclusive. If your history is one of having your sexuality regulated by use of the term slut, then I think Slutwalk is an effective answer. What I think becomes an issue is when the classic white feminist will argue that slut is a universal category of female experience irrespective of race, and that just isn't true. I recognise there are heaps of women of colour involved in this movement. I absolutely support those people that are doing it. But I think it's really important to say that rather than forcing people to get on the diversity train and say, oh, it's very inclusive, we need to acknowledge that this is a movement that is in fact organising around a problematic use of terminology that is endemic to white communities and cultures, and part of a culture that I'm part of. In doing so, this forces the acknowledgement that the experience of womanhood is being defended, but this experience is not universal, but it is under attack and it is worthy of being defended all the same. I'll finish it off with a quote from Audre Lorde, which I've learnt from Sandra, and really spoke to me when I was trying to find the words to say for this debate. When we speak, we are afraid of words. We are afraid that our words will not be heard or welcomed, but when we are silent, we are still afraid, so it is better to speak.
No tuhua te iwi, ko tama kai moana te hapu, ko maunga pōhatu, te maunga, ngā tamariki o te kohu. Ko Sandz Peipi Tepou. Kia ora everybody. Thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to participate in this debate. It's been a while since I've participated in any debate of any kind. But, oh, maybe it was Sunday night. So, I'm looking forward to the question. It raised a lot of challenges for me too, as a feminist and as a Māori wahine. So, I took about 2 seconds to decide to participate. Fair about right. Okay. I just wanted to start with a waiata here. You can all join in, I'm sure. Ka waiata kia Māori ea, ine I whakai, whakamea te mai, te whare tangata. Ine purotu, ine ngākau, ine rangi Māori e. Ko te whaia, ko te whaia, o te I'm going to sit down now. So I chose that waiata because it recognises the mana in wahine. And, you know, the diversity that we have and the ability that we have to be the holders of all. That was really my starting point. So do we really want to reclaim the word slut? Is that the intent of Slutwalk, or is it the promotion of conversation? I'm hoping it's the promotion of conversation. For whatever reason, it's unlikely that I'll partake in any Slutwalk march. He tangi tō tamariki, he whakamā tō te pākeke. So what I do reflects on my elders. As a Māori woman that has grown up under colonial rule, I perhaps have a different understanding of the word slut. I understand that my black feminist sisters, I stand with my black feminist sisters of America and all those sisters who understand that for us, the use of the word slut is not used to define them because of the clothes we wear, but because of the colour of our skin. I've spent a lifetime walking away from this word before I even knew what this word was. As a child, I thought my experience of child abuse was because of the colour of my skin, as if it made me dirty. As an adolescent, I was labelled promiscuous, and as a young adult, many around me made an assumption that I was indeed a slut. Although this was not actually true. I think possibly maybe in my life I've had 3 partners. So even, oh yes, and I've even had a white male say to me as his pickup line, I know what you brown girls are like, you want it all the time. Unfortunately for him, I had realised my strength and encapsulated by this time all that is mana wahine. It was his good fortune that the bartender escorted him out. He wahine, he whenua, he ngaro ai te tangata. So, from woman and land, without this there is nothing. What we know is Western society promotes the use of the term slut. It isolates and supports victim blaming. I, for one, do not support its reclaiming. We are many, we do not stand alone. Before you I stand with me. Before you I stand with me, my tupuna, our hapu, the iwi, and a people. If I am a victim, then we all are victims. Would my tupuna tolerate my support of the word slut? I think not. Te ao Māori, the world in which they existed, supported an affirmative approach to life and living, providing solutions through various pūrākau and whakataukī, some of which you've already heard. He ha te mea nui o te ao. I'm sure that many of you know this. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. O he whakataukī, ka ora te wahine, ka ora te whānau, ka ora ngā whānau, ka ora ngā hapu, ka ora ngā iwi e. So when woman is well, then the whānau is well. When the whānaus are well, then the hapu is well, and then the people are well. Within Te Ao Māori, there is a basis of equality promoted by collective responsibility, whereby we all have a role to play. In stark contrast to Western structures built on the foundations of common law by patriarchal men, philosophically, Māori promote wellness in its teaching, rather than teach from a deficit model, gaining further, and in a deficit model we gain further understanding of what is wrong in this world. Teaching comes from a place as coming from the deficit, whereas in Te Ao Māori, if we're coming from a place in an affirmative model and the pathways are provided for us, and we look towards working towards, and that we're trying to catch up to what is good. So it's actually the flip side of what we're trying to say around the slut. Rather than coming from the deficit, we come from the positive. Okay, and I've got a little bit more. It is difficult for me to sit in support of the word slut and the current use regarding the slut walk as it comes from the deficit place. To march with my sisters in recognition of mana wahine. Now that's where I want to be. At the front, you'll find me at the front, next to my sisters, my brothers, my kaumātua, kuia and mokopuna. It's singing loud and proud. When we recognise mana wahine, now that's activism. Kia ora.
Five minutes. Okay, so I'd like to start off by thanking the opposing team. We're very bad at discrediting ourselves, but I thought everything that you guys said was really insightful and thoughtful and respectful. So, however, I feel like, Helen, some of what you said was based on this idea that media coverage fixated on the provocative or the kind of sexualised aspects of the protest. I'd firstly like to challenge that, because I think that historically lots of types of activism have been lambasted by the media, or the media has picked up on particular types of activism that certainly is not representative or even often what the organisers were hoping for. So I feel like, the media reactions often are very different to what actually happens. And I certainly know that at both of the Wellington marches I went on, there were far more people who were dressed quite appropriately for Wellington weather than there were people dressed like myself who were there, who wanted to, to bare their bodies. I'd also like to say about that sort of provocative dressing and that image, for me, it wasn't about reinforcing myths of sexual availability. I wasn't thinking I'll dress like how I dress when I want to have sex. For me, the power was in the fact that I was wearing not much clothing, that I was trying to look conventionally sexy, but I was doing that and yelling yes means yes and no means no. So for me, the fact that I was wearing skimpy clothes felt like I was challenging myths of female passivity. I was challenging the idea that wearing skimpy clothes meant that you were up for sex, because it was an incredibly emotional day. I was definitely not thinking sexy thoughts at Slutwalk. But for me, having a bigger body that I felt confident to display in public, taking up that space and being surrounded by people who supported my right to wear my undies in public, and the fact that that was all combined with yelling about the fact that when I didn't want to have sex, I didn't have to, that for me in itself challenged those myths about sexual availability and also about conventional attractiveness and things like that. The other point I'd like to make is about what Sandz said about hoping that Slutwalk wasn't about reclaiming the word slut. And I guess I just wanted to frame it in, I think I wasn't clear enough when I was talking about reclaiming language, but I certainly don't think the aim of people who want to reclaim words is universal adoption. Certainly not the idea that everyone would feel proud to call themselves a slut, because I know that in my life there have been times when I haven't wanted to use that word at all. But the idea that maybe we can challenge the negative meaning of the word slut, that the next time a high school girl gets called a slut by a guy who's trying to bully her into sleeping with him, she can say, I am a slut, fuck you, you know? And she can leave. And, you know, just that idea that we can take some of the sting out of the word, that for me is really central to reclamation. And as with the word queer or as with the word whore for sex workers, I realise that there are many people in groups that have been labelled sluts who won't want to call themselves a slut. But I think that I'm happy to call myself a slut, but that's not what's important to me. What's important is that we can take the harm out of a really sexist, derogatory term. And the last point I wanted to make is that I think a march in support of mana wahine and led by mana wahine would be another really key thing in preventing sexual violence. And again, I do think that there have been lots of women of colour who have been reluctant to take part in Slutwalk. I completely agree that that's a real limitation on the movement. But my hope is that, as with other sorts of activism around sexuality and feminism, it will grow and evolve, that we can have these conversations and listen to that criticism and either, as Polly said, realise that different histories require different paths of action, or that maybe Slutwalk will change and evolve. But I think that it, as well as other marches and other forms of protest, is really key in preventing sexual violence, and most importantly too, in my personal lived experience, in helping survivors of sexual violence reclaim their identity, realising that the word slut doesn't need to have a morality, and that, no matter what slut-shaming or body policing terms you've heard, it doesn't, I'm waffling, doesn't affect your right to say no. And also, I think, in sending out a message that feminism supports people who've been called slut. Okay. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you, Rachel and Pollyanne. I enjoyed both your kōrero that you shared with us, and I congratulate you on both being able to come forward and to share your wisdom around the reasons why you participate and support the Slut March. I think that Helen did a very good job in her kōrero, and her research is well paid off. So I just wanted to talk around some of the, when we talk about shifting people's mindsets, that often takes time. And so is that a good use of our time? In terms of, do we have the time to do that, and are there more positive ways in which we can actually create that shift? Yes, there were definitely lots of areas of agreement, and I think Helen definitely said that it isn't that she's totally against the Slut March, but recognises that there are different vehicles. That's right. And then also it is really what it does do by what it has promoted through having the Slut March is this conversation itself, so that's a part of its success. And one of the things that I wanted to also point out around it focuses on adults and doesn't take into account the children. And given that two of us at the table both shared about experiences as children, I think that that's relevant in terms of what occurs through your childhood when that's experienced and where the word slut fits within your growth and development. And I wanted to finish with another whakatauki. Just picking up on the solidarity that you spoke about, Pollyanne. No te mea rā ia he rākau te tāwhito e mau ana te taitia he wahora e tū te kōhuiwi. So this whakatauki talks about solidarity, and it's indicative of a well-organised tribe where we have the elder, wise woman in the middle, and the younger warriors providing the external defences, which I think we see happening and occurring here today, you know, and within the room and often throughout the changes within feminism, and as feminism grows and develops, supporting and including cultural differences and learning to understand each other together. So, I also wanted to finish with another waiata. Because it's all relevant in terms of where we come from, te ao Māori. So this little waiata, if anybody does know it, then join in. I pray I don't go flat. E koreo engaro te kakano iruiruia ma irangia tea. So that whakatauki is from the people from around this area, Raukawa, from Rangiatia, and it talks about the seed, and we are the seed of Rangiatia and the possibilities when that grows. And I think, you know, there's a seed within us all, and this is another seed that we grow here today through the conversation. Kia ora.